Hello, everyone. Welcome to Blume Day X, and this is the Edtech panel. And boy, oh boy, am I excited to have Deborah and Shantanu here. I think it's going to be a cracker of a conversation. Uh, so Deborah is the managing partner at GSV Ventures, one of the storied early stage edtech venture firms out of the US, but increasingly play global. They pioneered edtech investing when edtech investing as a category didn't exist. Shantanu, of course, General Atlantic, one of the great growth investors, overseas financial services, consumer healthcare for India and Asia Pac. We know him because of an academy where he led, I forgot which round it is, I think the Series C, which kind of went 400 pre-money, I remember. And Shantanu also has led Byju's. He's led Ruangguru in Indonesia, so it's very well versed with tech. And between Deborah covers global early stage tech, Shantanu who knows growth investing in India. I think it's going to make for an interesting conversation. We're now for the session and hope to chat about a bunch of themes. Certainly, rising valuations, the evolution of the Indian edtech space. And Deborah is, of course, also familiar with India because she's been on the board of Akash, which got acquired by Byju's. So given all of that, I think it makes for some interesting conversation. And but before we get there, and we budgeted about 50 minutes for that, 50 minutes for that. We may have a small overrun, but it's about 10 minutes I need for my colleague Radhika, who covers edtech alongside me, to take us through a very short presentation, about 10 minutes, on the key themes and trends that kind of is that COVID has kind of engendered in the Indian market. A little bit about Radhika. She graduated from Berkeley and the Haas School of Business, majoring in economics. She now finds herself covering tech and consumer tech at Blume. And she's extremely passionate, if I may tell you a little bit about Radhika, about correcting the gender imbalance in the Indian startup ecosystem. And she recently kicked off a very interesting kind of program called Lead Tribe. It's a kind of a learning and networking program for women founders in India. But really, Radhika, I'll stop here. Over to you. Do take us through the key trends and themes that you're seeing taking shape in India. Yeah, over to you.
Thanks, Sajith. Thank you. And very, very excited like you to have Shantanu and Deborah on this panel today. As Sajith mentioned, so just quick 8 to 10 minutes on how we at Blume see EdTech and the four key themes that we've seen in the last year that we think will shape EdTech going forward in India. At the onset of the pandemic, we released our Blume EdTech thesis, and our back of the envelope calculation put the market at about 4 billion or so. We, of course, like much of the ecosystem, completely underplayed what this number looks like before the tailwinds all kicked in. More recent reports in the edtech landscape in India towards the end of 2020 have put this number at about 10 billion. So it's more than a 2x jump in just a span of 1 year. EdTech is, of course, a very, very complex and large space. We kind of sense make this in two parameters. One, what is the age of the learner? A 16 to 18-year-old learner, the key job to be done is K-12 learning, getting into college, versus a 22-year-old learner. The key job to be done is what first job can I get and how do I upskill myself for that job? The second is, how are you approaching the student? Are you going via this formal education space of certified schools and colleges? Are you going B2C, B2B? Or are you going by the informal education, much larger landscape in India right now? The largest market here is K-12, also how to get into college and then how to get out of college into jobs. COVID has created massive growing markets also in formal education space as things have moved online, and in early learning on the one hand and adult education on the other. Relatively smaller markets but still growing are B2B models in early learning and adult education. So we've put together a list of the top Indian edtech companies and global edtech companies for you to get a sense of where companies that you are most familiar with would fall on our map. As you may have guessed, the ones in red are Blume portfolio companies. As you kind of absorb this map, take you through the four key themes that we've seen in edtech over the last year. The first two are effects of COVID. The second two are effects of a changing consumer landscape altogether. We think that COVID will leave digital traces in formal education, specifically schools and colleges going forward, even after they go back to their offline avatar. Before the Geo launch in 2016, offline models did very well in India. When Jio's launch in 2016 put cheap mobile internet in the hands of tier 2 and tier 3 city users, online B2B models like Byju's and Unacademy did very well. B2B still struggled. Now we think COVID will be for B2B what Jio was for B2C. Lockdown has pushed digitally unsavvy teachers into teaching and evaluating students online. And we think this change will leave these digital traces behind even when schools go back to an offline avatar. Classroom education, core classroom learning will still stay offline because they also play the role of peer interaction, social development, daycare. But elements around this will start to go online. So we think revision, relearning, learning by doing, experiential learning will go online. Teachers will start evaluating, assessing, assigning homeworks, quizzes, exams online. Over the last year and a half, schools have also suffered a revenue setback because they couldn't collect fees. So they will now start capturing the 2 to 5 p.m. slot of a student's schedule with hobby and co-curricular learning going online via them. Communication between teachers, parents, students will go online. So the great news for most of you parents here is the parent-teacher meeting that earlier took up your entire Saturday might now become a Zoom call. And finally, administration. Everything from admission into nursery school to college placements out of campuses will likely go online. These are the 5 areas where digital traces are being created, and we think these are massive opportunities for new startups emerging. Second, capital and consolidation. In 2019, edtech companies in India raised 650 million in funding. This number sounds large enough, but this number tripled in 2020 to about $2 billion. We're all familiar with Byju's, Unacademy, Vedanta raising large amounts of money, but large bubbles are being created even outside these 3 companies. This funding is being used predominantly for 3 buckets. 1, aggressive marketing. Second, a sprawl into multiple verticals. We're now seeing Byju's also do test prep. We're seeing Unacademy also do early learning. And third, consolidation like never before. Again, Byju's and Unacademy kind of lead the pack, but other companies aren't far behind in terms of acquiring and cleaning up the smaller players in the market. Third, the Indian edtech companies are scaling global markets now. We're seeing a large export of edtech services into the US, Middle East, Canada, China, Singapore, UK, more maps than I could fit on this one slide. This means they're able to get higher ARPUs at still the lower costs, so very, very aggressive margins, and also able to get larger market sizes. The fourth and final theme that we have today is somewhat an effect of the third theme. When we think of the edtech consumer stack at Blume, and this is Blume's consumer stack, how we think of how different Indias exist. We don't think of one India, we see 4. The largest population bucket falls into India 3. This is a rural market, they're not as educated, more informal in manual labor. India 2 may not be comfortable in English, but they're very comfortable online now. India 1 is the largest consumer base of edtech right now. They are fluent in English, they're digitally savvy. The defining factor here is the willingness to pay for convenience. So Uber, Dunzo, Milk Basket fall in this bucket. There's a small niche market within India 1 called India 1 Alpha. This is less than 1% of India. Starbucks coffees and Spotify subscriptions come under this consumer bucket. And this was not in itself a large edtech market so far. So India 1 was what was driving the rise of Unacademies and Byju's in India. We're now seeing a big change where India 1 Alpha has emerged as a large market as well. Why? 1, because certain India 1 users are willing to pay premium amounts for specifically edtech products. So they're jumping into the India 1 Alpha bucket just for edtech. Second, because Indian edtech companies are able to now export services to a global market, many of the products that India 1 Alpha users were buying, global users also buy. So the market isn't as niche anymore. This is important because there has now been a fundamental change in the kind of products being prioritized in Indian education. Hobby classes, gamification, innovation, mentorship are all very important. So 3 broad buckets where this has made a difference. 1, preschool isn't just daycare anymore. You're also seeing reading, early learning, gamification. You now have 5-year-olds with iPads where they can visualize the solar system. K-12 isn't just about core academics anymore. So co-curricular learning, hobby learning, just as important. One interesting sub-theme here is that many of these students won't sit for the typical IIT, IIM, BITS entrance exams, the competitive entrance exams in India, but they'll instead go to elite universities abroad. So co-curricular and hobby learning become as important for their CVs as core academics. And finally, adults in the space don't save all their education-related spending just for their kids' education. They're willing to spend on their own hobby learning, on their own upskilling. They value networking and they want global exposure. Now, I've been going on for about 10 minutes or so, but if there's one slide I'd love for you to take away, it's this one. The four main themes that we think will shape EdTech going forward. One, digital traces will remain in schools and colleges, which means that a massive opportunity is being created in B2B education right now. Second, there is unprecedented capital flow and consolidation, which means that exit opportunities exist at almost every valuation level in India. Third, Indian edtech startups are going global, which means lucrative business models are coming up with very, very aggressive margins. And fourth, the emergence of India 1 Alpha as its own consumer base means there is a paradigm shift in the DNA of products being created. Thank you. If you have any questions, please do reach out to either Sajith or me. Very, very excited to hear from Shantanu and Deborah now. Thanks. Over to you, Sajith.
Thanks, Radhika. That was great. Yeah. So great. We're going to head to part two, which is the meet session. We're going to get Deborah and Shantanu talking. I hope to kind of melt into the background. But before I do that, public service announcement. Unfortunately, we won't be able to get you to ask questions, but there is a Q&A tab at the bottom. So all of you who want to ask Deborah and Shantanu questions, just put up there. Radhika and I'll look at it and we'll try and surface all of them ideally if possible, or at least the most important, interesting ones. So there we go. I'm going to kind of just dive into it straight away. I want to maximize time with the both of you. So Deborah, first question to you. You kind of have a vantage point view into the global edtech market. You've invested in the likes of Andela in West Africa, Photomath in Croatia, and you're looking at India actively. You're also no stranger to India, given Akash, etc. Now, I really want your perspective on when you interact with Indian startups, Indian founders, and how do you kind of see them versus, let's say, their counterparts, both in the US as well as in, say, LATAM or Europe? Really, what surprised you in these last few months as you kind of started looking at India? And are there any kind of little bit of advice, tidbits for Indian founders to kind of improve? Do it. Yeah.
Okay. I'll take a swing at it. Yeah, I think one of the, I think one of the sort of joys of the last 12 months of this lockdown, where as much as I love my home, I'm ready to get out of it and get back on planes, is the time we've spent on Zoom with Indian startups and Indian investors and sort of, extending our network into India without having to get on a plane. We've probably done, I think we just counted it this morning, over 250 Zooms to various folks in the India market. We're also looking in Southeast Asia, et cetera. It's interesting. So you guys did the Indian statistics, but last year there was $13 billion raised in EdTech across venture and growth. That was up from a previous high of 8 billion. So a very material leap. India obviously was Baiju was a big story here, but there was plenty, as you guys pointed out, capital raised across many other important companies. And interestingly, India, China continued to dominate the tables, for all the logical reasons, and continues to be sort of a parochial market where the Chinese companies are, for the most part, staying in China. India actually became the second largest receiver of venture and growth capital in EdTech, surpassing the U.S. market for the first time ever. And I think that's a really important and notable thing. We think that the India is an incredibly important market. We're doing 5 investments. One has been announced in Quizzes. 4 more will come behind that. We're hiring a partner in India. We think our third fund, which we're beginning to raise right now, will probably maybe 50-50 India, rest of world, or at least India, Southeast Asia, rest of world. So we think India has all. I mean, the interesting thing for what folks who are not familiar with the India market, people forget that every single college graduate in India is an engineer. So, that's not remotely true in the US. So finding a technical co-founder in India is sort of a no-brainer, right? Because you've got so many talented, even with lower penetration of college graduates, the numbers are stunning, and so that alone is important. I think that we've seen, obviously it's the rising middle class is an important trend. We tend to go towards the bottom of the pyramid if we can, not to the 1A category that Radhika was talking about earlier. But obviously, both are important. We think that some of the dislocations that did happen in COVID, we'll see how it goes back. Obviously, looking through the lens of Akash. One of the things that was for an American coming into an Indian company, realizing that most of the sales were done door to door, which is of course that people would be afraid to do that here. But anyway, and how that got how COVID sort of upended that. I'm sure some of that will resume, but I think that was some of the efficiency that has been plugged in through COVID. We think the opportunities in India are enormous. And I do think you all talked about this, but I think that what American and other countries don't appreciate is the absolute disruption that can be created by the Indian edtech providers, because it's already happening subtly, but eruditus, coming in under 2U, both equally high quality players in the OPM market, but eruditus's ability to come in and deliver the same quality, same high brand partnerships at substantially lower cost, is a very material thing, even with 2U putting as many people as they can into the South African market to try to drive this similar cost savings. So I think the power and what Baiju's been able to do in buying Osmo and then White Hat and then driving 100 million plus of revenues into the US. People are shocked when they hear that that Baiju had as much over 100 million of revenues last year in the US. So I think that the little secret that people haven't woken up to yet, whether it's in the for-profit sector or even in the traditional university and not-for-profit university and K-12 systems outside of India, is the opportunity for disruption by really high quality edtech providers coming out of India. So we're just all we love it. We love the cultural differences and the cultural similarities. It's just it's been a great 12 months for us getting deeper into the ecosystem.
Cool. Oh, thank you for that. I'm going to probably circle back to some aspects of what you said, but I want to just take Shantanu first and Janatu next, rather. So Shantanu, you've seen most of the big emerging, unicorns and sunicorns in the Indian space. We actually invested in the 2 unicorns, but you've virtually seen almost every single hot company north of 100 million. You also have a vantage point into the Southeast Asian market. Okay, and you've also seen them over the last 7-8 years, at least since you've been at General Atlantic. So, in space and in time, I just want to not really answer specifically, but generally I want you to explore what's it been like the last 7 years in terms of seeing Indian founders evolve, Indian edtech startups evolve. And I also want you to just go a little bit deeper into the question of valuations, because we begin to see fairly rich valuations for edtech startups. Not necessarily bad when you're invested into them, but certainly if you want to enter, you ask yourself, hey, what's happening here? But so I just want to get your perspective on these things. How do Indian startups compare over time versus their peers? And if you want to just double click a little bit on what you see about on the valuation front, please.
Sure. Sajith, so first of all, thanks a lot for inviting me here, and it's a privilege to be on the same panel with Deborah. Thanks a lot, Blume. I've been looking at the edtech market for a very long time. Actually, my first stint at GA was in 2005, and there was a big Korean company, which is still there, called Mega Study, which was one of the hottest.
Me too.
Yeah. And there were a lot of listed US players too, doing online vocational education. So the first point I'd like to make is that edtech has been around for a pretty long time, over 20 years. And obviously with the advent of low cost internet and bandwidth, and with Web 3.0 or App 3.0, and the advent of mobile, it's transformed significantly, allowing affordability, access to a whole new class of customers who otherwise could not access it 15 years ago in its first form. As far as India is concerned, there are a couple of characteristics about the market which I'd like to add to what Deborah said before I come to the entrepreneurs. I think one has to keep this in context that India is a capital-starved country and a natural resource-starved country. So if you look at our exports, we export the three biggest exports out of India. All three of them are in skills, not in goods. The first is software development, which is bulk of our exports. The second is the English language through our BPO revolution. And the third is yoga, for which we don't make any money, but it's a huge global weapon.
It's a good one.
All three of them are skills, not goods. And the reason is because our entrepreneurs were always starved of capital because of poor bank intermediation, etc., 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 never to be able to build productive manufacturing capacity. We are big in a couple of areas in pharma, which is also high skill based manufacturing, and even in automotive components in high skill based manufacturing. But if you actually, a few days ago, I was listening to a talk by Paul Krugman, and he clearly showed that how India, almost 65 to 70% of our exports are all either in high skill manufacturing or skills itself. So with this context, it's not a surprise to us that this is a country where people want to pay for skill development, because this is the way to break out from the lower middle class, which is to invest in your children's skills, and one day they're able to make an income which helps the family break up. Which brings me to the point saying as to why EdTech is so successful. It is because the ROI of investing in education is perhaps the highest anywhere in the world, in India, in elementary education, in primary education. And one can do the right math to look at minimum wages and educational wages and inequality based on this. But I'm pretty sure the ROI will be meaningfully different from other markets in the world. Indian entrepreneurs have realized this for a very, very long time. All models starting from brilliant tutorials in 1995, I believe, which focused on test prep, all the way to Byju's and Unacademy today, they do understand that Indian parents are willing to spend a substantial amount of their savings, of their earnings into education. And they have continuously focused on, innovating, coming up with products which can help, children get a place in government jobs, a place in prepare them for the big tests that show up post 12 standard, and so that they can go to government jobs, they can become a software developer and go to and travel to US one day. So these are the dreams and aspirations that Indian EdTech has been fulfilling. The quality of Indian entrepreneurs is no less than anywhere else in the world. And that's because they are dealing with such a heterogeneous and cost conscious and ROI focused segment of customers that the customers do all the teaching. And they have to keep adapting to the customer demands, service millions of customers, build support systems for them. And hence, these entrepreneurs who have been able to build big companies in India are ready to take the world and take their products and innovate and have really the low cost operating structure that Deborah spoke about. I completely agree, to take on the world. So I remain quite optimistic. On valuations, the specific question you had, education, and just like healthcare, is a sector which in general is considered as something which is staple, even more staple in developing markets like India, which I just explained the reason for. If there was to be a macroeconomic downturn, this is the last spend parents are going to cut. And hence, inherently, it lends itself to be a higher multiple sector. Having said that, I think what the valuations today might be discounting is a humongous amount of growth, but maybe miscalculating the amount of competition that is likely to emerge, and hence the pressure on margins in the years to come. So that's where I'll stop. I think there's an element to be optimistic, but there are elements where one needs to be more careful, and that's the area that I think we might be not paying enough attention and focus to.
No, that's really interesting. You said that. It's actually a good way to put it. Pricing in growth, but not accounting for likely competition and erosion of margins. So yeah, so Deborah, just quickly second, yeah.
And I would just say, I just quickly another. I mean, I think an interesting point. I mean, two other sort of in the global context of EdTech, and really taking Shantanu's first comment. EdTech's been undercapitalized, right? I mean, that's been art for us. I mean, we've been doing this 25 years. We think it's, right behind climate change, the most important issue in the world, because it's going to, assure the forward participation in the economy of billions of people all over the, the globe, whether it's being threatened by job obsolescence or poor, earlier educations. So it's been totally capital starved until the last couple of years, and it has borne, and I don't know if it's, and we haven't studied hard enough specifically in India, but it's actually carried much lower valuations, sort of attendant with that. And as we continue to sort of parse apart, and obviously there are some bubbles across the tech sector broadly, and they're always going to be mispriced transactions. But and I totally agree with Shantanu. It's a long tail. It's a staple everywhere. There will be mispricings. The pandemic's going to cause some Roman candles, and companies that had big spikes that, maybe wealthy families are going to stop spending online when they can actually send their kids back to physical activities. So there'll be some Roman candles, but for the most part, I totally agree. This is a long tail trend. And I think the edtech sector actually still generally has a slight lag to overall tech valuation. It's definitely not ahead of it. And I think the final piece is, if you think about the capital markets for ed tech, I think we finally have enough capital coming in early stage, all the way up through growth, and what GA and others are doing, and up through private equity. Actually, what we don't have yet is a liquid public market. So you're still, if you look at the global public market for ed tech, it's still an infinitesimal percentage of overall capital markets relative to its percentage of global GDP. So we still have big corrections that need to happen there to smooth out. I mean, hopefully we're getting there. Coursera, which is our largest investment, is actually refiled their IPO yesterday, and we'll see a string of great companies coming out public. Hopefully, some great Indian companies as well. Baiju at the front of the pack at some point, but. Anyway, so it is a sector that's still, sort of adjusting itself. And it's so funny, Shantanu, I was obsessed with Mega Study when the South Korean company was the first really organization to glorify teachers, and really way ahead of their time. It was fascinating.
Yeah. No, thank you for that. It's really, really interesting perspectives. So I'm just going to head across to Shantanu, and
again, sorry, just like Deborah did. One thing, I think the mega study example, Deborah, since we are discussing it, and since Sajith has a question about for all edtech entrepreneurs to read something, I think everyone should read about mega study.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah, that's the only company wherein it highlights, and it actually goes to the point you were making, which is, why is the representation of education or edtech in the market cap not as much as the contribution to GDP everywhere in the world? And that's because the public sector and the government will intensely come back and interfere with this sector, given how much political importance it has in any country. And the mega study example is a great one, which is, if you become a very successful company in education, how will the government come and really come after and regulate you much more than what you expected? So that's another risk that, the education, the current valuation may not be discounting, Sajith, and that's why I wanted to add this point.
No, it's a great point. So Shantanu, I'll stick with you, but slight change. So Blume is a sector agnostic investor, and so in many ways, GA, of course, is sector agnostic. You invest in, and you yourself invest in multiple categories. Just generally trying to kind of think, it's a question our LPs kind of sometimes ask. So what's an ideal portfolio construction? But more importantly, that's one, that edtech versus, for example, others. What's like a good representation? And two, within edtech, do you kind of feel that, for example, typically the largest segment in India is K-12 test prep, and the next after that is now continuing education, which is your eruditors or upgrad, etc. Is this something that you feel that naturally lends to being overweight on, or would you kind of maybe look at other sectors, for example? Just to get your thoughts on that. Yeah.
So I think, Sajith, given we are a very diverse fund, we do not necessarily make a specific allocation to, one particular sub-segment. I think we are very driven by entrepreneurs and where is a great business model being built. Having said that, education and healthcare and financial services are the three areas where perhaps all other sectors as well, where technology is completely disrupting business models. So to that extent, edtech is a very important sector for us, and that's why invested in two of the leading companies. I think going back to the point you asked about within edtech, I believe at all points of time we need to be monitoring how do the ROIs for the customers change. And English learning may be a phenomenal ROI in China, but has not turned out to be a great ROI in India. And we all need to go back and understand the root cause for that, right? Is it that public education in English in itself services a lot of demand, and hence there is no monetization capability? But using this illustration to say, what are the segments within India, and this may change for Brazil, and this may change for Korea and for US, wherein the highest unmet need for the highest ROI is available for tech to serve. And to me, that's what and eventually will end up creating, very, very large companies. At the highest level, I feel given India, like China is the factory of the world, India is really the English-speaking software development country of the world. And to some extent, I would also add pharma to it, the largest chemist and biologists sort of skill base in the world. I would believe edtech models focused on this, like Great Learning and some of the other models, on these two skills will eventually have a lot of ROI-driven customers coming for upskilling, maybe even for online degrees, and eventually, figuring out a way to be in the job market, because there's such a large job market for these two areas. So I would see probably the higher education skilling space and edtech space kind of merge, with the government allowing online degrees now, which is the model that one of our companies, Open Classrooms, has in France. And this should emerge as a very large area because it's got very tightly measurable ROI. And I love that, because a proposition which has very clear ROIs should eventually end up scaling a lot. Who will figure out the right business model, the right CAC for this, and do it in a profitable way is something we'll all watch and hopefully back, one of us or both of us.
Oh, this is great. Yeah. Any reactions, Deborah, very quickly? Any reactions to how you look at your intended portfolio of 5? I mean, we don't know which ones other than the one, and that's really big in the US. Quizzes. Yeah, it's an Indian startup.
Yes, no, they're in over half of U.S. schools. They're beloved. It's fascinating. It's similar to another company we were invested in, Class Dojo, which is sort of in 100%, kind of 100% of U.S. schools, but it's doing a different thing. Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, we look at pre-K to gray. We call it pre-K to gray, learning and skills. And we also sort of, we don't try to bias anything. We really want to follow great entrepreneurs with great ideas. And the the return piece is critically important, and I think becoming easier every day to actually quantify, thanks to great data science, et cetera. So I think we call it return on education, and when we think about it, we think about companies that are increasing access, lowering cost, providing leverage to the learning provider, the teacher, the faculty member, that yourself, if you're self-teaching, and then delivering high learning efficacy. So I think that the good news is, I mean, a decade ago it was very hard to tell whether, who could tell whether, when you had books, you couldn't measure whether they were efficacious. Today, with the digital learning has actually allowed us to move efficacy into the front of the line in terms of being able to test whether things are actually delivering what they say they're delivering. So I think that's critically important. I also think it's funny because in the U.S., 10 years ago, for sure, K-12 was just viewed as, no one would touch it. There was no investor. Shantanu and I sent him an email, laughed. I remember talking to Phil Ford, who was one of the general partner at GA at the time in the US. about he got the highs on the whole concept of going into the K-12 education market. And with the advent of new business models and entrepreneurs who found frictionless ways to go into the system, where they either both could avoid exposure to the political downside, the governmental interventions, as well as just the procurement, the Byzantine procurement that exists in the K-12 system and the higher ed system. Ironically, if you look at the list of global unicorns, it is most heavily weighted in the K-12 sector, which is kind of fascinating. In hindsight, nobody would have called that a decade ago, when no real investor would touch it because everybody who tried had lost money. So things are changing, and I think it is the advent of more clever and creative entrepreneurs finding better business models that are not subsumed by traditional sales processes and things like that. So it's an interesting, and I'm sure that will continue to change. We'll see what happens over the next decade. But so we, you have to kind of keep you have to just kind of keep it all open and see what entrepreneurs and what ideas are appealing to you. It is friction is the operative term from our perspective. EdTech has been a history of friction, right? It's in every country, in every sector. It's how do you get beyond the massive frictions in delivering EdTech, be they political, be they biased, be they, whatever.
Yeah. No, thank you for that. And I'm going to stick with you, Deborah, for the next question, because you spoke about business models. And so you have seen successful business models, like, for example, like Dojo, for example, or Clever, for example. And some, not all of them will translate well into other markets. But if you were to look at, for example, an Indian Dojo, would you consider funding in it? For example, your photo math, would you fund, for example, a kind of a problem-solving, doubt-solving, app in India? Given that it could theoretically compete with, like a photo math tomorrow. How do you see this interplay? Like, does it give you comfort if the Indian startup is modeled itself on a US one? Or would you say, hey, no, we need a very differentiated play? Just take me through your thinking here.
No, I mean, I think the way we're obviously very, because we're a sector fund, we are very sensitive to conflict, that having, direct conflict. That having been said, these markets are massive, 7 trillion or whatever, with the ed tech sector itself heading to $1 trillion, in the not too distant future. And so there is a lot of, room to run. I think there are also in these business models. So Photomath, which is a math solver, it's a dominant math app in most English, it is the #1 math app in the world, really. And is building additional businesses behind that. They're about to launch a fascinating product called Professor. And they do have a presence in India. And we've talked to a number of the solver businesses. So I think it's and have chosen not to invest. So I think we make decisions on an individual company by company basis. We really think about, how might they mash up against a Photomath. I mean, also, back to the point earlier that Radhika made in her presentation, we also are pretty good at thinking strategically with our partners about whether a merger makes sense, or what, strategic combinations that can double jump businesses. And the deeper we are in countries and in sectors, the more thoughtful we can be about trying to help our portfolio companies think about what might be a strategy that optimizes for what they're trying to achieve for themselves. So I think, we're very careful, but I think that, that doesn't foreclose us from investing in a business that has a solver component. In fact, we're making an investment in Indonesia right now that will have a solver component to it, focused solely on the Indonesian market. So, that's how we have to. So we take a case by case and make calls on that. But these markets are very large. They need more players. I mean, honestly, if you think about it, it's the higher ed market. You could look at the whole swath of higher ed players in India. It's not enough. I mean, you need more than kind of the dominant guys there now. So yeah, and we're hoping that we hope one of the benefits we've already seen it in the U.S. Of COVID is it actually draws out more entrepreneurs who have been observing the dysfunction of the delivery of home learning. We hate the term remote learning because it's not remote, it's in your home and your home's not remote. It kind of makes it crazy. But we're seeing it already that, some, engineers sitting at home watching their kids or watching their college students or watching even their coworkers struggle with things, or going back and creating new companies and coming out. So we think there'll be this whole new crop of founders that come out of COVID, inspired by what they saw as dysfunctional delivery.
Yeah. So that should be interesting. Just like we've got all these work from home apps, we're looking to reinvent, work from home. So that was my tactical question for Deborah. Now I have a very tactical question for you, really about, and maybe it's very selfish, but really just take me through the process of how a company kind of gets on your radar, because not too many, you do have a certain revenue benchmark before it kind of gets on. How do you track it? And just take me through the process of like how a GA investment in EdTech really comes around. I know you don't do a lot, but generally, can you take me through it? Yeah.
I think our team is continuously looking for interesting thoughts and ideas from our entrepreneurs, from bankers, from using conferences, newspaper articles about entrepreneurs, awards. So that all points of time, not as extensively as Sajith, let's say Blume would do, but companies which are somewhat, at least post revenue or gaining great amount of traction, we would typically reach out to them and want to have some conversation with them, even if the company is not ready for a late stage growth investor. Because at the end of the day, we invest and we stay invested for a very long time for typical growth investors. So we're also making an assessment on the entrepreneur, because at the end of the day, the business model may have to pivot 3 or 4 times over during an entrepreneur's journey. And you're trying to assess what you hear, the vision, when you meet the person 1 year later, 2 years later, 3 years later, how has their thinking evolved? So we like to track entrepreneurs really and hear their thoughts, meet them again, and kind of see where they're going. And with this, we develop really confidence in entrepreneurs. Eventually, the best entrepreneurs figure it out. And our job is to keep meeting them and meet them when they figure it out and, help them with capital. So.
Right. No, that's interesting. So multiple meetings over periods of time, giving you how they're changing, how they're reacting, how they're growing. That's interesting as well. So this could be my last question, really, but it's a big one, and it's kind of the same question to both of you. So Deborah, if you're comfortable, I'll go with you. So we're beginning to see a wave of Indian startups, most definitely making a lot of revenue from the US. Whether it's Simply Learn, Edtech 70% revenue, QMath 60% revenue.
Yep.
Yeah, you spoke about Byju's, which is making as much as 100 million plus, you said, but White Hat is making more than 60% at its peak from the US. Some of them are beginning to break through, and we are beginning to actually see an interesting bunch of Indian startups. One, for example, teaches music to students, and they started with Indian segment as a beachhead, but they're beginning to break through into Asian Americans, the other Asian Americans, for example, Korean families, etc., who prize music learning, or for example, Caucasians, native. So they're kind of breaking through to that segment. We're also beginning to see quizzes, which came out of Bangalore, but now has home in Bay Area, and they're beginning to see tremendous traction in schools. It's a US product, effectively. We kind of Radhika and I jokingly call India 1A as the 51st state of the US, because we speak English, we quaff Starbucks, we watch Netflix, we use iPhones, etc., etc. So and sort of like how Israel was to B2B, that sort of India could be to EdTech most certainly, and maybe some consumer services. I know of someone who in the US who, for example, got their dog trained from an Indian person. So I don't know how they managed, but this happened. So generally, I'm just going to stop here. I'm going to ask you, how are you seeing this? Is there space, for example, for an Indian company to come out and kind of play natively in the US? Quizzes is doing that, but are we going to see a wave of Indian companies? You mentioned about Editors versus 2U. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that, a couple things. One, we're spending some time on, again, back to the, poor capitalization of the sector. We think we'll finally have $100 billion company. And then the question is, when do we have $1 trillion company, right? So if you think about the tech sector generally, however many trillion companies there are, given the representation of GDP, at some point that should happen. Now, TAL in China is halfway to the 100 billion. We'll see if Baiju or another competitor can actually, rapidly consolidate their way towards that match. So I actually think it's a little. I look at it a little differently. The world. So what's one of the real positives, and it was happening before COVID, but as far as ed tech goes, the world is now flat, right? And 10 years ago, it was an Indian company, it was a U.S. company, it was a Canadian company, it was and none of them went outside their borders. And frankly, none of them. I remember just having a conversation with Scholastic, which is one of the great global brands in education, and how they had struggled to deliver, drive, revenues outside of, they had them, but they struggled outside the U.S. So I think in general, borders are going to be irrelevant to dominance in ed tech. I think the only borders that will continue to be relevant are Chinese borders. And that's because, number one, China's so big that, you can be $100 billion company never leaving it. So why bother? And second, I think just some of the language issues and some of the political issues make it more challenging. And so that's the only one for now that would appear to stay in a parochial mode, which is perfectly healthy because it's such a large parochial population, or such a large population. Otherwise, the world's flat, and I think so. I think Indian companies will dominate Europe. And it's really a demographic. I mean, I think everybody's playing. We're actually investing in an Indian company, extraordinary founders. Who have launched in MENA and Malaysia, and are seeing incredible traction, keeping the back end in India, but not selling into the Indian market. Really have no plan to. Probably will go to the U.S. first, and then So it really is you're following demographic trends. Obviously, population's falling off a cliff in the U.S. So that's not the play in the U.S. What you're getting in the U.S. is purchasers, right? You've got purchasing power. So you're following purchasing power and demographic trends. And at some point, the purchasing, as the purchasing power rises in India, so it's just an interesting game, right? As we watch populations grow or shrink, and purchasing power grow or shrink, and so I think Indian companies have an ability to dominate in a lot of places. I certainly think they have an ability to dominate in the U.S. I think a company, and by the way, capital is king. So if you look at General Atlantic, who's one of the investors that I've admired most forever for 30 years, it knows that game, right? That you can get companies, and the capital that Baiju has armed them to do some really creative consolidation, and Baiju is a very strategic guy, and I think I think other players need to. By the way, Dan Rosenzweig at Chegg is also a deeply talented strategic guy with a lot. So capital is becoming this interesting weapon. They're about neck and neck actually. Dan's probably 12, 14 billion. Baiju's valued around 11 billion. So I think you have this fascinating. We call it kind of we call it weapons of mass instruction is our term. For this global arms race to raise enough capital and then really create a powerful, high impact company that can address hundreds of millions of learners. So yeah, I mean, I think we should expect to see Indian leadership in the ed tech category for the foreseeable future. And the waning of some developing countries, unless companies wake up and sort of smell the coffee, as it were. But it's real clear where you're seeing innovation. Innovation's really been China, India, U.S. and Southeast Asia. It's been much more difficult. Open Classrooms is one of the notable few. Kahoot in European, Scandinavian markets. But it's real interesting to see. Maybe Africa will come along one of these days.
Shantanu, any reactions?
No, I broadly agree with everything Deborah said. I think the world is flat, and especially as far as services or products are concerned, if India in 1995 could start exporting so much software, and yoga even much before that, when people couldn't fly to the US or had dollar controls, then building a great global product out of India in today's India is something that will certainly happen. I'm particularly fascinated by companies are not which are just tech companies. For example, Duolingo, which is one of our portfolio companies. Really fascinated because it could be anywhere. I mean, Duolingo could have a development center in Korea, in Bangalore, and selling to all over the world. Or another company like that is Hotmart, which is actually came out of Brazil, but today it has 25% revenues coming from the US, another 25% from Europe, and I think it's going to be big in India as well. And we have to all watch out for TikTok. In general, China, otherwise has been behind in having products because of the fact that they do not have a huge supply of English creators. But a technology tool like TikTok could be built by anyone, anywhere in the world, and that could just take off everywhere, right? And TikTok is very serious about education, and we should expect them as huge competition for everyone.
And Duolingo, the other interesting on Duolingo is they're one of the few foreign countries that's actually built enough a revenue base in China.
Absolutely.
Oh, I think that's interesting.
Fantastic company.
Yeah.
And so I believe that one could see a few tech-only companies rather than creator marketplaces or educator marketplaces become some very, very large part of the market cap Deborah is talking about being created. Because there are many, many use cases in which tech only can solve lots of problems, and that's the fastest way of growing when you're not dependent on, a lot of people. The last point I would make is slightly in a bit of a contrast to what Deborah said, would be that I think capital is a moat only in very bull market cycles. Like one could consider maybe this perhaps is one like that, where there's surplus liquidity everywhere in the world, and in these periods companies end up consuming a lot of capital. I think my own view is that through the down cycle the best companies will emerge, just like it happened in 2003 2004 post the crash, and after that, and really the best products would be the real winners, not the sort of biggest capital raisers. That's a bit of a contrast, because I think whatever consolidation happens in this way will happen, but then after that, it really be the consumers and people really voting with their money, customers voting with their money, which will make the winners emerge.
Yeah, and I agree. I think what's interesting right now is that there are a couple of guys who have the opportunity to run the tables on consolidating really unique and importantly high quality product companies, and do a better job selling the product, a good product than perhaps the founders could do themselves.
Agree, Deborah.
This is great, and I'm going to request both of you if you can extend it by about 10 more minutes to about 8:10, because there's lots of questions, and but yeah. So the first question, and I'm going to take this question that's come from Mekin Maheshwari, one of the leaders, led HR was an engineer to an HR at Flipkart, and is very passionate about education, and is heavily involved with developmental work there. So his question is, I don't think it's addressed to any one person, but perhaps Deborah can take a crack at it. Do you evaluate businesses on improving learning outcomes for most or median customers? So learning outcomes, do you evaluate that at all? Do you think these would be important for companies to last? So yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, that's what I was saying a little bit earlier on this return on education. I think if you don't have efficacy, it's going to be very difficult to have a long-term position, right? I mean, consumers are smart, they're savvy, they don't want to waste their time. Duolingo is interesting because it really started as a fun game. I mean, I've taken Spanish. I don't speak Spanish very well as a result, but it's interesting what you're trying to accomplish. So some people go on Duolingo just to sort of have fun games, some practice their Spanish. So I think everybody has a different version of what efficacy they're delivering, but I think learning efficacy is essential. We're making an investment in India in a K-12 company that has blown me away in terms of how they're able to not only measure, create, to deliver efficacy. far better than anything I've seen in the United States, and would kill to bring it to the United States. But yeah, no, I think the game is you got to deliver learning results.
Yeah. No. Yeah. There's another interesting question, slightly unrelated, but this one is more relevant to Shantanu. So, so this question from Shashank Banka. Is EdTech K-12 market in India and a winner-take-all market, which will consolidate into a duopoly post long-drawn marketing war, as seen in food tech, for example, food tech and e-com, ride-hailing, Ola, Uber, Swiggy, Zomato, just for Deborah's listing in e-commerce, Amazon, Flipkart. That's question one. Is it a duopoly like all of these? B, do you see Amazon making big waves here? So, do you want to state that? Yeah.
No, I do not think it's going to be duopoly. In markets which offer a very thin gross margin stack, like food delivery or transport, eventually whoever ends up building supply on both sides of the network, or demand on one side of the network, supply on the other side of the network, has significant moat in that liquidity, like a model like ride sharing, or I would say even food delivery. I do not think those kind of moats could be there for marketplace based edtech companies. For example, if TikTok was to come in a big way, or if Unacademy was to choose to use its test prep marketplace and extend it to all different segments of edtech, those kind of, I think, network effects to me are far more stronger than any other moat. So if any edtech company is able to successfully do it across the K-12 segment, it could be a very long moat and could create a monopoly. But given the structure today, I do not see any source of advantage wherein new companies cannot emerge and take significant market share, because it's a very heterogeneous market being serviced with what I would describe as fairly simple products, really good products, but simple products today. And I think you will see the consumers upgrade to better products. Either the same companies may do it, but there's a chance for a whole lot of new entrepreneurs to come and innovate there. So I don't see it as a duopoly.
Not got that. Yeah. Okay. So I think the next question is more relevant to Deborah. Do you think the ISA model holds promise in India? This one, Konark Singhal, who runs Mount Blume, founder. And if you've seen them, what's your perspective on that?
Yeah, we've been careful not. I mean, we're not fintech investors; we're edtech investors, and so we have one small investment in an ISA related company here. So it's hard. I mean, I think that ISAs are they will work themselves out. I mean, right now, we're seeing some issues in the U.S. with providers who've used ISAs. I mean, actually, two cases have gotten themselves in a fair bit of, have had real issues. One is just how do you account for, one is just frankly, students not being truthful about their employment situation post the education. So, actually stopping payment because providing information that wasn't accurate about their job status. So that's not good. And so people need to be, you got to figure in very large numbers. So people need to figure out how not to be caught by that kind of trap at large numbers. So I think we've got a long way to go in the US to get the ISA product to a place that makes sense, where it's not, frankly, where it's not, really expensive and having having a massive subsidy on the highly employable folks, so we'll see. I think it has a long way to go. I think it's a generally good idea. I think it just depends on. I think there's just got to the actual financial underpinnings of it need to be better, I think, developed. So, but I'm no expert on it because, as I said, we've so far stayed away, which has so far turned out to be a good decision. But anyway, we also have a lot of not-for-profit subsidy of the ISA market. So I think that's also complex when you got the not-for-profit and for-profit. You got to figure out where people are playing in returns, and because they're differentiated returns, obviously. So that also is a complexity in the U.S. market, at least.
Yeah. Shantanu, any thoughts here on ISA? I mean, Scalar is the biggest in India, I presume. Scalar interview-based / Scalar. But any thoughts on ISA or something to track?
What Deborah said. Very similar to what Deborah said.
Yeah. Fair enough. Okay, so the next question I must admit is it's an interesting one, which I think it's to both of you, and it is from Manish Singh. And Manish Singh asks if and caveat, Manish works at TechCrunch. So the question is, what is your view on Byju's acquiring Akash for $1 billion? That's a question. Yeah. So yeah.
I don't think I'm not sure I can comment. I'm on the board of Akash, so I think probably not appropriate for me to comment.
Yeah, I would agree. It's too specific a question for me to answer as well.
Yeah. Okay, so there is a question to Deborah. I think it's more relevant for Deborah really, and there's one more after that. The last two questions. As an edtech company based in India, how do you kind of sell into American teachers, students, or schools? Are there any thoughts, etc., that you've seen some of the companies in your portfolio do well?
Yeah, well, I think that, I think Quizzes has done this, but I also think, Class Dojo has done this. Prodigy Software in Canada has done this. So I think that the freemium model where you can really get network effects, where teachers are so viral, and if they love a product, and what I love about Quizzes is that it's such, it's a product that is just dead down the middle of everything that learning science says needs to happen. One of the best ways to learn is rapid turn quizzing, during your learning process, much more so than the summative tests at the end where it's too late to be, capturing what you did or didn't learn. So what I love about what they're doing is it's dead down the middle, and it makes teachers' lives easier, right? So anything that you can deliver that's going to make a teacher's life better, because teachers have too much on their plate, they're doing too much, they're asked to do too many jobs. And I think if you can waltz in with a product, Class Dojo did the same thing, which is around really positive classroom management, and teachers love it, and the penetration in K-8 is massive. So I think if you can offer a free product or a freemium, in Class Dojo's case, it's free, and it's a parent pay. In Quiz's case, it's a freemium product where you go in and teachers begin to pay at a certain volume level. In Prodigy's case, it's a parent pay, free schools parent pay. So those are the models that have shown to be to have the highest adoption, a great product, free at some level to teachers, and that then convert into that either monetize at the teacher on a volume basis or monetize at the parent level. So that's what I would recommend if you're trying to tackle it, and things spread very virally very quickly. There's so many places where teachers congregate, whether it's Teachers Pay Teachers or other sites. There's just a lot of national congregating of teachers.
Yeah. Well, thanks. So one of those very a good playbook. Actually, I'm going to kind of share that with one of the founders we'll be talking to as well. So last question, and I think this is more relevant for you, Shantanu. So what are your thoughts on, and this is from Shweta Doshi, what are your thoughts, this is aimed at Deborah actually, okay, but I'm going to encourage Shantanu to take a crack at it as well. What are your thoughts on internationalization of education, where top global universities, global challenger universities can come to India? In fact, Shantanu had a mention about open classroom they've invested in, and kind of the degree being a model, so you should take a crack at it as well. But I'll repeat, what are your thoughts on internationalization of education, where top global universities, global challenger universities can come to India? And that's, yeah.
Well, I think the biggest question for companies coming into India so far that I've seen is monetization. I'm sure Shantanu has a firm view on this. Coursera, for example, which represents the top the best brands in universities globally. It has got a very large presence in India. In fact, their Coursera for Campus was launched in India a year ago, in February, which has seen extraordinary adoption in COVID. And so I think that it's here, it's already here. And I think the biggest challenge you hear from entrepreneurs coming into India who are not, India domiciled is questions around, monetization. And I think we consistently hear that. I'm not sure I'm not sure I know of an entrepreneur, who feels yet that they have successfully tackled that topic. But if you guys have ideas that you want to give to entrepreneurs.
Yeah. Shantanu.
I think they absolutely can come. However, the real challenge is that in higher ed, the signal of the degree is very, very important for the job market. And that's really a big challenge, because if one could do a great online degree, but it has no value in your job market, then you would not spend on it. So that virtuous cycle getting created takes some time. Do I see a day where someone would do a computer science engineering degree online and become a phenomenal data scientist without necessarily getting registered with an offline university with a direct, let's say, job into Google? I think that will happen. Is it about to happen? I don't think so. It'll take some time. But I do think models will emerge. I think there's a very interesting model around coding, wherein there's a company that Unacademy owns now called Code Chef, and the high-end coding competitions on that signal to the best, employers of software engineers in the country as to who are the best coders in the country, and that is even more important than a degree today. So you could be coming from a grade 3 university, but if you're really good, well on Code Chef, you are likely to get the highest paid job in a market in India. So these kind of signals will take some time to develop, but I don't think they are very far away. We could already see some of this. So if challenger universities can come and clearly do stuff that's relevant for the Indian job market and signal that, I think they'll be successful. It's just that the first few attempts have failed.
No, this is great. And Deborah, I think the one question I didn't ask you, which Shantanu answered, was the one article, video, podcast, anything that you would recommend for Indian founders to study. Shantanu said study mega study.
Yeah, no, that's a great one. I was actually going to send, and I was trying to, and I'll find the, I think you can actually get it on our website, but we actually hosted with Temasek a conversation last month with Dan Rosenzweig, Baiju, and Luis Bonan, moderated by my partner Michael Moe. And honestly, it was there you have three of the great leaders of startup edtech, now scaled edtech, all three geniuses, and my partner Michael, 4 geniuses. There we go. And it's on our, I believe it's on our ASU GSV website. But I'm actually was just emailing with my partner to make sure it's publicly available, because it was a really insightful conversation from three guys coming from from really interesting life stories, and delivering incredible learning results at scale, each one of them differently. So I'll send that back to you guys so you can post it out to make sure I know where we can actually find it.
Yeah. Yeah, Radhika is going to do a tweet thread of this. We'll make sure that that link gets incorporated into that. Yeah. So thank you so much. I've learned a lot, and it's been really insightful. It's been interesting hearing your perspectives. Really appreciate the time you've taken. 75 minutes out, Shantanu, on Tuesday evening, Tuesday morning in Chicago. Thank you so much. And look forward to interacting with you. Yeah.
Awesome.
Goodbye. Have a good day. Have a good evening, friends.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.